you should be able to see my slide. It gives me tremendous pleasure to introduce you to a wonderful scholar, Dr. Clay Dibrell, professor at the University of Mississippi. I have worked at University of Mississippi for a couple of years. Clay and I have been colleagues, and he's not only a good scholar, but a wonderful human being, as you will see in the next 1 hour as you interact with him. His areas of research include entrepreneurship, family business, innovation. He's published in leading academic journals. That's again a theme that you have seen over the past 5 days is all these people you're meeting, they're well published, serves on multiple editorial review boards, as well as has been a guest editor for multiple journals. He has a PhD from the University of Memphis, where he majored in strategic management and minored in international business. And with that, I will stop sharing, Clay, and it's all yours.
Okay. There we go. First of all, thank you, Vishal, very much for letting me speak with everybody here. And Vishal and I joke about this. So the beauty about this is the fact that we're getting older. This is what this really means. So we know each other, and we're getting to do cool things like this, I should say. So anyway, I'm at the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss. Vishal and I were peers before he headed over to Alabama and has done amazing work there at Alabama, as I'm sure you're well aware of there. So just kind of give you a brief overview of, I'll be talking more about family businesses today. I'm sure you've heard a tremendous amount already from the other scholars, including I know you had Kim Middleton, I believe, yesterday. And so Kim and I worked together, and she's in here quite a bit, as you'll see, just because she's such an impactful scholar across the board there. So first of all, theoretical contributions, where to look, theoretical trends and methodological trends. And of course, I have my own horror stories to share with you, but also my own benefit there at the back end for family business article. So one of the big things right here is, so what? So this is that classic, what is a theoretical contribution? And I know each of you are different stages of your doctoral journey, we'll put it that way. And you're thinking about, okay, where do I go from here? What's the next steps? And so part of this is figuring out who you are and what you're trying to contribute to the literature, but also, what is this contribution? I'm always amazed. I remember having reviewers respond back to my comments and saying, I see your contributions, but they're just words. I don't understand what they mean. And I just, you're like, oh my gosh, how do you convey it anymore? So this is the classic. We're all facing this and we're all dealing with it. So it's that classic, so what? And one of the things I want to highlight is one of my personal pet peeves, even though I have done it in the past, I must acknowledge, is the classic, no one has done this before. And this is, I know Vishal feels the same way because of his own editorial experiences here. But it's just amazing how many people say no one's done it before. And of course, when everybody says no one's done it before, it immediately makes me want to go look on Google Scholar to see if anybody's done anything in that area. And then the second thing I want to go is, why has no one done anything in this area, right? And so you try to create a different twist on it. And this gets back to the research question. What is your research question? And being theory driven in terms of what you're trying to do with that. And I'll give you some examples throughout. But one of the things I always like, you can also rephrase this, such as there's been scant work done in this area, or the theory is all pointing toward our next step is in this particular direction. Just say something that's that way versus or reframing it versus no one has done it before. Just don't do that. That's because it's intellectually lazy, but also it's just a red flag for a reviewer to immediately jump on. All right, theoretical tension. We all struggle with this too here, and I know I won't spend a lot of time here, but if you can create some kind of theoretical tension, I know some of the better received papers I've had in the past have always created some kind of tension within in terms of how things look, what we're anticipating versus what we actually happens. And so I recently did something we're going to talk about later. It's called social emotional wealth, with actually 3 doc students at the time at Ole Miss that has done pretty well at Family Business Review. But the whole point of that entire paper is literally creating tension between what is and what is not. This thing called social emotional wealth for that. So another one is the boundary conditions. I love boundary conditions, and this is where we talk about moderators often in this regard, in terms of what are the boundary conditions, where are we related to, but that is a contribution. So think of that as something to consider also for that. New variables, rearrangement of existing variables, the consideration of how this may look. These are also potential areas for contributions. Granted, as you know, we kind of rank these things as we are wont to do as doctoral and terminal degree holders here, where we're trying to create and manage the field, the domain. But you think about theory is usually the top one, highest ranked one. And then as you kind of work down to maybe your third level or secondary contribution, you can think about this in terms of, did we do something new methodologically here? Did we go with a secondary data approach? Did we go with the primary longitudinal? Did we do something different here in terms of how we looked at it? And also, there's multiple journals now that actually really appreciate replications. And so if you can do something that's really cool and replicate it and demonstrate that it's still valid and valuable today, that's a contribution in itself also. And of course, how many contributions is enough? And the answer, of course, there's never enough, never enough. But the classic is 3. So try to have 3 contributions if you can. And one last pet peeve on my contribution list here is the fact that make sure your contributions at the front mirror and reflect what you also have in the discussion section. You'd be amazed how many times I review or I'm an editor or something and literally they don't match up. And you go, so where's the contribution then? If you talk about the intro, make sure you talk about it later is my point for that. All right. So the different types here. And this is when, especially for people who are not in family business, you're probably not going to do a pure family business paper in terms of something that's really unique to family businesses. And before I go, I want to spend a little time here about why family businesses and why it's cool. It's because literally, I think it's some crazy number, like over 87% of all businesses in the world are family businesses. And so the beauty about family businesses are they behave differently. So I like to call them highly irrational because they just don't follow rational, non-family, publicly traded companies' approaches. For instance, they like to not lay off people in terms of historically as a group. Whereas we know that, and especially here in the US, there's a tremendous amount of pressure to be as efficient as possible and cost efficiencies, especially in a corporate environment. And we don't see that same effect happening in family businesses. So maybe family businesses are not therefore a good investment, which is where we see like things like agency theory pop in and other aspects there. But one of the big points here I want to highlight once again is that everybody is surrounded by family businesses. Regardless of where you are in the world, you are surrounded by some kind of family business. And how does this look? And it's just really interesting to follow through and see what were the types. So for instance, here we have founder versus non-founder there. I have a family-owned versus family influenced. So founder, we find that the founder is usually entrepreneurial, highly entrepreneurial. One could argue they are entrepreneurs, right? Which is part of the reason why family businesses fall under entrepreneurship in terms of the overall domain for that. And then we also have the family-owned versus family influence. So family-owned would be, as you can imagine, predominantly completely owned by the family, and the business exists for the family. Whereas a family influence may be a publicly traded company or another company that has a majority of shareholders where the family doesn't have a total percentage, but they actually have some kind of managing percentage, whether voting rights or something like that, that they can help influence the strategic directions of the firm. With all that being said, though, family owned versus family influence, they would behave differently once again on that scale there. And then we have the classic family versus non-family, and this is predominantly where most of the family business literature occurs. And I'll talk later here about the different areas, such as organizational behavior, psychology, things like that, that could really fit into this kind of area right here that could be a real contribution. So one of the things, and also this helps you in terms of targeting where you want to publish. So when you try to do pure family business papers, it is more difficult to publish in top tier journals, such as like AMJ or something like that. Because inevitably they're going to ask you, what's the difference between a family and a non-family? So you're going to have to start out at this family versus non-family before you were to get into that. Versus the pure family business paper, that would be better targeted potentially toward Family Business Review, a Journal Family Business Strategy, or even a Journal Family Business Management journal for that. But because that gets some more heterogeneity arguments there. And then last but not least, we have the international context of family businesses. So something I've been pretty excited I'm working on right now is the fact of emerging versus advanced economies. And we talk about, and we're discussing and studying the role of authoritarian leadership in the family business. And so we find that its link is actually positive in relationship to innovation in emerging economies versus in developed economies. We don't find that relationship. We actually found it to be a negatively related there in terms. So once again, we see these differences in the context, international context. So think about what is an international context, especially maybe if you're outside or wherever you are. Just think about how could this fit, and do I see differences for there in terms of how family firms behave versus like a non-family firm in that regard. All right, so this is just a quick me doing a perfunctory look through the different journals. You can see here if you're saying, okay, where can I target? First of all, we see that there's dramatically more acceptance in mainstream elite journals for entrepreneurship research, but also for family business research. And as we can see there, the big jump though would be like an SMJ, which they're targeting much more of not atheoretical, but the theory is not as important as the phenomena we're studying and moving into. I'll put it that way. Interestingly enough, you can see a dramatic difference there, like SMJ and the numbers that I popped in, especially when we think about publicly traded firms for that. And then we also see a pretty big jump in like an org science and even at AMJ. ASQ, interestingly enough, has actually gone down, maybe because they're such at the cutting edge of everything that it's no longer cutting edge. I'm not sure about that, but it's just really cool there to see the differences, but also see where you can target. One last thing I want to point out here. So as Vishal alluded to, and one thing that Vishal and I both have in common is that we're macro. So we're strategic management professors. So we have more of a macro focus versus a micro focus. In family businesses, historically have been much more of a macro focused study domain for strategy scholars. With that being said, though, there's this tremendous amount of room and space for organizational behavior scholars, psychological or IO psychology, and these other areas, which could really be more avail themselves to you as an opportunity to make your own contribution for that if you're into those areas there. All right, so give you some of the outlets that we're talking about here, besides the ones I just mentioned. So journal management, we have Journal Management Studies, Business Ethics Quarterly, JIBS, Journalist and Business Studies, Journal Business Research, where I'm an AE, and so I do a lot of the family business papers there. And so there's a tremendous amount actually published in Journal Business Research for that. So if you're needing a target, that may be someplace for you to consider. So I have to get in my, my own little cell there. We got a Journal Business Ethics also for you. That's really another excellent journal in terms of the top 50 there, Financial Times. And then we can break it down even further in terms of entrepreneurship journals. And basically what you'll see there is almost every entrepreneurship journal we have is likely or potentially can publish some kind of family business. With that being said, Journal Business Venturing, I know part of their editorial mission is definitely a very strong focus on more on the entrepreneurship side. So if we were to do something with family, we'd have to make sure that the family would be family entrepreneurship, right? In terms of transgenerational, looking at that. SCJ is maybe a little bit more macro too, in terms of some of the things we've talked about. Whereas we have some of the broader ones, such as JSBM, Small Business Economics, Entrepreneurship and Regional Development, International Small Business Journals, a little bit broader in terms of encompassing approach there for those journals. As I mentioned earlier, we have some very specific family business Review, Journal Family Business Strategies, and Journal Family Business Management. With all that being said, Family Business Review is actually and Vishal, you can correct me here, but it's one of to me, probably the top end of the family business journals. What's your opinion, Vishal?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, so they've done Don Newbaum is the editor there, and they've done a great job. And so when I say, and we talk about these elites and things like that. So, or the Australian Business School, where they are, what star, premier, and all these things. Just remember, we're really talking about they got a really low acceptance rate. So, a really low acceptance rate, and they get cited fairly well. And so, Vishal, you want to add anything?
Yeah, Clay, I was going to ask you if you can give them a sense of what kind of acceptance rate we are talking at sort of the the excellent, the entrepreneurship, and the family business.
Right. So, great question. So, we think, okay, we'll just go straight to JBV, ETP, SEJ. That is probably between, I don't know, 3 to 5%. I would argue JSBM is moving that direction too, or they would say they're probably there. The other ones have a little bit higher, but all of them are below 10%. And then for the FBR, that is definitely between a 0 and 3%. They would argue because they've gone nuts over there, which is fine. And then the JFBS is higher. I would say it's 10%. And then General Family Business Manager is probably closer to 20%. That's whereas, like the Journal Management Studies, JOM, AMJ, and remember a lot of these, and I'm sure you've already heard about the desk rejections, as well as it's the desk rejections don't count toward the ones that aren't a part of this, right? So in terms of that acceptance rate, and so it's crazy what's happening in terms of competition. With that being said, though, that's why you're here doing this stuff, right? So you can become more competitive, and that's what we want to. And also, you can contribute once again those cool things there. Okay, another aspect, special issues. We've had a lot of luck. Well, I've had mixed because I'm old. Once again, because I've done so many of these on special issues. Some are good, some are not so good. But that's definitely an area for you to consider, especially if you got something really interesting that you said this would be a really good fit. And there's ways to do that, such as reaching out to the special issue editor to see if they think that this article would be a match for what they're looking for. They can't say, "Hey, we're going to accept you," but they can definitely say, "Hey, we'd love for you to submit this," and that'll hopefully give you an advantage because you're in the right avenue, the right lane for that. Conferences. So I love acronyms, as you can tell. I've got acronyms everywhere. So the Family Enterprise Research Conference, that's usually the big one in the US for family business. It's now going to be held in Dublin this year for the first time outside of in Europe there. And then we have IFERA, which is the International Family of Entrepreneurship Research, and it's actually based in Europe. And then we have the European Academy, basically the EISAM, and they have a family business track, which is very good. Academy of Management, so family business would fall under the entrepreneurship track again there. Same thing with SMS, which is Strategic Management Society. And the big one, which I'm sure you've heard of lots about this week, is BAPSN, and that's the BERC. So BAPSN does also have a family business area, and I personally like going to BAPSN quite a bit. Actually, one of the last times I saw Vishal was in Munich at BAPSN. We were hanging out there. So BAPSN is excellent, and if you can, and what I like to say about BAPSN, and Vishal, you can jump in here too if you like, in terms of the quality of the presentations or whatever. There's a little bit uneven potentially. With that being said, though, if you get accepted into BAPSN, that also means I think you're on the right track in terms of the topic area.
Yeah, I concur with that. If you're an entrepreneurship scholar, Babson is where you want to get accepted and present. And that's a good test of whether you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I would say that's even probably better than Academy of Management and SMS or Strategic Management Society in that regard. Is that your take too, Vishal?
Yes, I think Babson is much better outlet for entrepreneurship than, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And so USASB is also, it's an international conference too, and it's more about entrepreneurial teaching these days, but it's also got a lot of research areas too. It's just that it's not nearly, well, it's not as research focused as Babson is. Babson is still the top, so you can think of it that way. All right, so a couple things here theory-wise as we transition now. RBV, God bless it, is still around, still doing great things. The big one there we see a lot about in terms of resource orchestration is a big one right there with Tarico and also Sermon and Hit. They have really moved that along there. Agency theory. So I do a lot with agency theory. I have a trust issue, as Michelle will probably tell you about sometime. But anyway, I love agency theory in terms of helping to explain it, because once again, we see like family businesses, they have a unique agency problem. One could argue almost like a principal problem versus a principal agent. Whereas others would argue they also have an agent problem because some of the family works inside the company, some works outside the company for that. So there's a lot of fertile area right there for anything you're dealing with governance. More recently, even though I have not seen it getting much traction, is stewardship theory. And stewardship theory, some of you may or may not be familiar with it, but it's actually looks at people as being more positive, stewards of a company, doing the right thing for the company, and not seeking out self-opportunistic behaviors that they would as far as agency. So stewardship is more like we're trying to do something for the family to create legacy. It's often associated with things like long-term orientation of the family firm, almost a patient capital perspective too. And so I have dabbled in this area too, even though I know some of my, I'll put it this way, some leaders in the family business area just do not like stewardship theory because they just don't believe it exists. But anyway, it's a unique. So if you're more positive, think about this would be you're more positive on people. Think about stewardship theory. Put it that way. Go the right one on that. Behavioral theory of the firm. I think Vishal was telling me that you read the paper with Rich Gentry and I did, along with Jamin Kim in 2016, where we looked at the behavioral theory, and this is kind of gets us into the different, more of the micro foundations of that and the logics, the dominant behavior, dominant group there, dominant logic. Then we have the behavioral agency model, and this has actually turned out to be a really big one. Socio-emotional wealth. This is huge. If you ever want to look up someone who's been cited well, because I know you've already looked up my Google Scholar profile, do not compare me to Gomez Mejia, because oh my gosh, he's crushed it. It is like out of the park crushed. So he has done amazingly well with socio-emotional wealth, which comes out of behavioral agency, something that him and Bob Wiseman did back in 2000 together when they were trying to figure out this whole agency perspective, but also individual behaviors and what links those together. The fiber is dimensions of the socio-emotional wealth that came out there, and Barone and Cruz have worked with Gomez Mejia quite a bit there, Lewis, and so they've done great work in that area also. But if one could argue socio-emotional wealth is probably it, and agency are probably some of the predominant theories right there overall. And something more recently coming about, and this actually comes a little bit out of the social identity theory. The I in fiber, by the way, right above that is identity theory, is identity. But social identity theory, you know, is more about the group level, so the family level. And this has come about really strongly more recently in terms of how well we identify that strength of that relationship for that. And I find this unique and something to be discussed down the road is like, how does identity theory or how does identity compare to roles or role ambiguity or things like that from an OB perspective? Because I know I had a really good conversation not too long ago with a strong organizational behavior scholar, and there was a lot of more overlap in terms of how we perceive these things for that. Okay, so some topics that you can also think about. So some of these topics, we have heterogeneity. This is basically the pure family business within family businesses. Because one thing that we have done a lot in the past, and we do this family, non-family, is we treat it binary. So 0, 1 on this ranking there in terms of either family or you're not family. And so what we discovered though is that this broad group, like any broad groups, there are a lot of niches within those groups or clusters or configurations, or however you want to use it, that look at this heterogeneity among family firms. And so there's been a lot more effort there. Ezra Milley and I had a chance to do an edited volume in 2019. And then Josh Daspit and his crew, including Jim Christman, who's another big name, as you'll see pop up here a lot, they did a really nice paper talking about different categories of this heterogeneity in terms of what type of heterogeneity are we talking about. Then we have family business involvement. This is where how many people are involved in the business in terms of the relationship there. Another area I just love, even though I haven't written in it, just probably because of my own issues, but deviant behaviors of family business. Cannot stress that enough how cool that is. Because it turns out, as I just alluded to, family businesses are everywhere in the world. So if they're everywhere in the world, anytime a corporation does something potentially harmful to the community or to the environment or whatever it is you're looking at in terms of negative behaviors, there's a pretty good chance it could be a family business. And so historically, the scholars, family business scholars, we have looked more on the positive side. I'm not talking about a positivist. I'm talking about a positive side there where they actually do good, right? They all do good. They sing kumbaya, they hang out together, but that's not the case. So these deviant behaviors are phenomenal in terms of thinking about some of these negative or dark sides of the family business going forward. Transgenerational wealth creation. This is literally passing the money on down to the next generation. I think you've also heard that going forward with this next transfer of wealth, is some in the trillions of dollars among families that can be transferred between one generation to the next. So what does that look like in terms of legacy? Carry on. Is it constraint? Is it an enhancement? What does that look like? Another one is the business family. And this kind of gets back to family sciences, an area which we don't often talk about because, once again, we're macro people often who are doing this stuff. But family sciences, they look at the dynamics within the family and how this could influence. And so this would be another really cool area for you to consider about. So Danes, or Danis is actually as pronounced, she has done some amazing work in that area up out of Minnesota. And of course, the landscape of family business outcomes. And these are, I'll pop this up here. I'll come later then. Okay, but anyway, if you ever get a chance, look at Andy Yu's paper in 2012. He's got a tremendous number of dependent variables that you could consider in all your studies. And he did this massive study himself, actually, for his dissertation. And granted, it's getting a little bit long in the tooth. With that being said, though, there's so many things there that can help you say, okay, what about this? Also, it can help provide you with the reasoning for why you're looking at this particular dependent variable when others have not, right? That contribution that we talked about again. So use an example, use an identity paper. So the marketing perspective, we see it being applied there. Justin Craig and I did something with Peter Davis in 2008. We have Epp and Price now. Family identity, once again, from a work-life balance perspective, popping up. Career conflict, David Marshall has done some really cool work there with the family support. But this is a careers paper that's looking at family business. So something to consider there. With the family business, Thomas Zellweger, oh my gosh, she's done great stuff there too. And then the role identity, where we just talked about earlier in terms of this role theory versus identity and how do they intermesh. Whereas we see it right here, Mark Schinkel actually, he combined them together, what they look like there in that particular paper. So when you think about this, think about your own areas where you could go. So natural environment, CSR, more done there, once again, because there's so many firms. And would it be interesting to see, do some of these family businesses actually create more pollution? Do they do these things at sacrifice in order to benefit their family versus the community? So that would be interesting, right? Because family businesses have been historically suggested to all focus on their community and things like that because of socio-emotional wealth, because they want to have a good reputation, a good legacy among their different stakeholders in their community. International context, Kim Edelston and Ben Olivier, I'm not pronouncing her name at all, but Kim Edelston, will stick with Kim. She has done a lot of work recently in terms of family business in the international context. That Irregla paper, that is actually a review, systematic literature review, to help focus the next area if you want that. But so there's still tremendous gaps and areas there if you consider for that international. Regional versus global strategy, for example, is one there. Game theory, even though it may not be as sexy as it once was, it's still pretty cool. And so we still got a lot of work done there. Celine Smith did a really cool paper, and she looks at game theory in terms of resilience, crisis situations, and stuff like that. She's done some great work. She's at Lyon. Then we have role of gender for this. And actually, I know, Vishal, let me tell you, I'm going to reach out to you, and I should have asked you beforehand, because I know you have been incredibly successful with the gender work, your work in gender. Have you looked at gender at all in terms of family businesses?
No, not so far, but we are working on a paper or a project where we do look at that, but it's new area for me as well.
So that would be really cool, to your point, because I know you. It's, and as you can look at Vishal's own CV too, as I'm sure you have, he's done just some really, really amazing work there with some gender items, and has done really, really been very successful. And so this is another gap that we have in there, because we have all kinds of things in terms of birth order, all this stuff that fits into place. What does this look like? Can women do it? Men? Are there certain cultural variables? Once again, it could be an international context. What does this look like? Because potentially, you could be removing or potentially not having a successor. Flip side, though, is I know it's Japan, where they have family businesses, the oldest family businesses. But as many of you probably already know, but they're able to adopt sons who can then marry their daughters. So to keep that on, Vishal, would you like to throw in on that?
Yeah, that's as I was working on gender and family business, that's a very unique aspect of Japan I learned about, where you can adopt a son-in-law into the family, and it's literal adoption. They take on your name, and it's adult adoption of son-in-laws. I had never heard of that in any other culture.
And they do it once again because they want that legacy, that continuity, that length. Because if you think about it, it's kind of hard to always have a male heir, I'm guessing. Since I don't have kids, I'm not sure, but I'm just saying, I think this could be hard to do. All right. But those are the kind of cool, unique examples that would just be really interesting to kind of dig into more deeply on that. And thank you, by the way, Michelle, for saying son-in-law versus son. It gets a little weird, but thank you very much for that. All right. Okay, and then we have property rights theory here too. This is something I've worked on with like Jim Chrisman and others. And Ruth Aguilera has done amazing work in this. I think she's got journal management looking at the property rights theory here. But so this is really cool in terms of what is property rights, especially when the world's getting a little bit different, a little more wacky in some of the political forms there. What does this property rights look like? This is Andy Yu's work that I meant to put earlier, should have put earlier. It's with Sorensen. Sorensen actually wrote a book on this. And so we see once again all the different areas that we can governance and how this affects the different categories. This is just an example. And then we have this governance again, but the broader performance, strategy, economic impact, dynamics. So where does this fit? But these areas that are potentially very interesting, that could be an interesting source for you. For instance, we do very little with human resources in family firms. That would be, how do we hire people? What do we look at to hire people? So I'm looking at working with Walter Davis, and Michelle knows Walter, and we're trying to talk about this HR perspective. What does this look like from an HR perspective in a large family firm? Because the family wants to embed their values within the company. Then how do they hire people to help do that and carry that forward, for example? All right, and then some other areas real quickly here. We have accounting, marketing, finance, corporate entrepreneurship. These are all areas where we see some really cool research coming in from actually different disciplines. And this, I'll put this slide here because many of you inevitably are management or entrepreneurship. But I would love for you to think about working with others in other disciplines, especially when you go to lunch, talk about things or coffee. Say, how can we bring in this really cool concept, such as investment perspective on family firms versus only looking at it from a, how does the strategic decision making within a publicly traded family firm. So something like that, for example, you could plow into that, which would be really cool. This is what I was talking about with the organizational behavior and psychology. Torsten Piper, who is also the editor for Journal Family Business Strategies, he's written a very renowned paper, 2010, talking about this relationship. And so one of the things I'm working on now with some other scholars is emotion. How does emotion play in with the family business? Because it's a part of our socio-emotional wealth, the emotion, the fiber I alluded to way back earlier, as well as the fact it's just emotion is in everything the family does. because everything you're working with the family members who you've known forever, both privately and publicly, and how does that affect strategic decision making on that? So, for example, and last but not least, supply chain management. I worked with Mark Pagel back in the day on, we got something at IEEE regarding the operations, but supply chain management operations would be another great area for family business. So it's just unique to see, where do family businesses, are they the same versus are they different? And that's the big aspect we're talking about. And then explaining why they're different. Okay, finally, macro stuff, and I'll try to be quick here because I'd love to get more questions. So we got grounded theory. There's Tricia Rea. She's the big person here in this area, and this is one of her subdisciplines. But she just follow whatever she does. Follow her guidance. She's amazing, right there. Psychometric primary data collection. We still do some of these things. We still have good and bad cross-sectional data. The other ones are I want to highlight conjoint analysis and QCA. Conjoint analysis, I'm sure you've read, especially with Dean Shepard. He's done some amazing work in that area, but it's surprising to all of us, including myself, that more of us do not do a conjoint analysis because it is so rigorous. So I highly recommend a conjoint analysis where we can apply it. I know that we're looking to do something along those lines, but I've been looking to do something along those lines for like 10 years. Because once again, I'm old, so I'm going to lose steam. But QCA is another classic there that's really good. And I have a new bond paper. This is where we worked with a guy named Chris Thomas at St. Louis University, and it is a ton of microstats. So if you're into micro or psychometric, that would be a good paper just to kind of give you an understanding what that looks like. Last, and definitely not least, secondary, because I see the market moving much more towards secondary, especially toward a macro perspective as we seek that area. And it's the usual suspects there. Robustness checks, control variables, proxies. What are we, family control versus family influence, economist versus continuous, ownership, voting rights, board of directors. These have all been different proxies that we've seen for families in publicly traded family firms. I do want to highlight that some of my micro colleagues still view publicly traded firms as being publicly traded firms and not family. So there's still this debate within about what is family and what is not. The usual, and I want to highlight Pankaj Patel and Rich Gentry just because I know both of them do amazing stats. Great statisticians. And then more on the grounded research, something done recently, something called necessary condition analysis, which I really like and I believe could really fit in well. Probably if you're doing some kind of conceptual work, this would be something that you could use there. And it applies at an extra level of rigor to your conceptual work to help the statisticians and all of us be able to grab a hold of it. So we just found some good success there. Of course, multiple family dyads coming into place there. Econometric modeling, definitely. And of course, mixed methods. Everybody wants to do mixed methods. It's so freaking hard. I don't know. Yeah. So have you ever done mixed methods? Have you had anything published with mixed methods?
It's interesting you mentioned that because yesterday Kim brought it up too. And I've published one paper on mixed methods, and I think she said she's working on one paper on mixed methods these days. But it's, like you said, freaking hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because it sounds so straightforward. It sounds so great, right? It's like, hey, give us some interviews. We'll do this, we'll do that. And yeah, it's crazy hard. Even though I'm supposedly doing some myself now, I'm not as good as Vishal. I've never had one published. So follow Vishal's lead on mixed methods. I gotta say there.
I tell them follow Kim's lead.
I love it. And then lastly, for the micro stuff, and we definitely see this like in Journal of Business Venturing and other top journals. It's like JP or anywhere else, you need at least about 3 or 4 studies, it's starting to feel like, to validate and to build upon each other. And we also see much more in terms of experimental design coming into play there. So that would be cool in terms of vignettes or running your own experiments and group dynamics for that. All right, I'll skip this stuff. These are all things we've talked about in terms of corporate governance. The model, skip that too. Real quickly on the tail, I had a paper rejected ST, had this paper that anyway did really well. We decided to improve upon it in 2007, collected a bunch of data, won best empirical paper, humble bragging, of course, at the AOM division. And then, because we had a winner's curse, I'll just tell you, this is the winner's curse here on this one. And then it gets rejected everywhere, no matter what we did. JP, journal managements, still gets rejected. Had an R&R journal management, it didn't matter, it got rejected. So we kept on going down the list, got to JLB, you got desk rejected at JLB. So now, we're like, as you can tell, it's already been 3 years of just pure pain and disappointment in this beautiful paper, supposedly. And then we'll get it one more time, and it ends up at FBR in fall 2015 and actually gets published in 2017. And then there was a FBR, Family Business Review. They all complained that they didn't like the story, so we had to revise the story, even though they liked the method. So it was brutal. So anyway, this is that paper. And then flip side though is I've had another paper, So and Natural Environment, Oregon Environment. They had a special issue, got in on that, met someone at one of the conferences, talked to them about special issues. I cannot stress enough, if you're thinking about going to a conference or not, go to the conference, go to the sessions, talk to the people at the end there, especially if they're doing any kind of special issue, or just talk to them about your ideas. They would love to hear about it. And this surprisingly is fantastic in terms of not only networking, but understanding things like, hey, why don't you submit this to us, or come for a visit, or whatever it may be. And so we did that, and then the paper got up and then down, and it was published in like 14 months. So that's the whole point right there. So, it's just not, it's totally weird. Everything is, it's all luck. So that's basically it. Michelle, is there anything you want to add to that?
Clay, I have some questions, and then we'll open up the floor to questions from folks here. So if you can stop the sharing, that way we'll have we can see you fully.
Well, I don't know if that's any good, but yes, I totally got you there.
So one of the things you mentioned is this paper on scale development, this paper you did that got published, I guess 6 or 7 or 8 years later. How did you stay motivated during this time? How did you, what gave you confidence that this has some future?
Well, so I'll just tell you guys, I've been very lucky to have a couple best papers at conferences. And inevitably, anytime I get a best paper at conference, I know it's going to suck in the market. It's going to suck when it gets to getting to publication or something. I call it a winner's curse every time. And yeah, part of this is professionalism. Part of it, Vishal, as you know, and you definitely know, is you got co-authors who need a publication. They need something. Because one could argue, and one could have even suggested to us that we should have just stopped instead of, and back when we got rejected at journal management, we should just stop there. And actually, we did change co-author leads and do some other things, and that's where Don Newbaum took over. And he, anyway, it's just one of those things. We just go, every paper has a home. I just don't know whether every paper deserves a home. I think that's a better way of describing it. But it's definitely motivation, and also inevitably someone in the group needs a paper, and if I like the person, which greatly helps, because Vishal, I'll speak for you here too, because I know we're both of a tenure now where we can choose who we want to work with, and if we want to work with people, we want to work with them. So
right. So on that note, I'm going to ask you another question. When you work with PhD students or junior scholars, especially on projects that you submit, it gets rejected, then revise, then resubmit, then revise, then keep working, still get rejected. How do you get them motivated about this process? Because many of them think, oh, I submitted a paper, it should get accepted.
Great question. And if any of you ever run into somebody by the name of Chelsea Sherlock, you should just hug her. She was my doc student during COVID, and literally we have done everything possible to get rejected everywhere. With that being said, though, she's done really well. She's at Mississippi State University, and she's done incredibly well. And the goal there is, it's a profession, right? It's a game within a game, but it's also a profession. And what we do is really hard work. I mean, I think a lot of people don't think it's hard work, or they always wonder, And so Vishal's lucky or fortunate, I should say, because he's married to someone who's in the field, who's a PhD. Whereas my beautiful wife still doesn't quite know what I do, except it's pretty important for me to publish. So like when I'm on vacations and I'm in the room working instead of doing something, right? That's those are the kind of things you really want to work with people who've got that same work ethic or ethos on that. And when you don't, you can tell. So that's, and also once again, it does matter. It really does matter in terms of how well you publish and don't publish.
Right. Now, you mentioned a little bit about the differences between family firms and publicly traded firms. And yet, the paper we read from you today, and we read a couple of other papers yesterday, were about publicly traded family firms. So how do you see those in terms of similarity or differences with family firms?
Yeah, so to your point, one of the things that we really struggled with that, particularly that ETP, we were using like family firms, family publicly traded family firms, and the reviewers really pushed back. For instance, we had one reviewer who hated the paper, of course, and really pushed back hard on it. And so he was saying that best, this is something called a family influence firm, not a family control firm. And so we went down the road in terms of what is a family controlled versus a family influenced. And then he almost, I'm assuming that he, because such a jerk, I'm joking. But anyway, they kept talking about I see the stats, but I think the stats are wrong, right? And so once again, when you have this conversation, you've got to build upon it. And so that's why we really doubled down on the dominant logic perspective, because it's real, right? It's just how do the company, the coalition, and how we go forward with that. And that's where we really saw that working, especially in terms of long-term orientation for that. And I was fortunate that I was in a presentation, once again, conferences coming through with Tom Lumpkin and Keith Brigham when they were talking about that particular paper, when they were presenting it, and we had a chance to talk about it. And it was really, really good in terms of us being able to think through that, because it really was beneficial in terms of us writing it up to get past that. The reviewer who was very skeptical of our work, I'll put it that way.
So it seems from what you just said that the part about family influence firms came through in the review process, may not have been there in the original version of the paper.
Correct.
Could
Definitely.
you speak to that a little bit with our participants, how some things come up in the review process that you may not have could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So inevitably, especially when they get rejected at the end. So inevitably, when you go through this process, you're going to have all the we were on a paper not too long. I'm on a paper right now. We'll just put this right now. And literally something happened where they said, we want you to focus a lot more on socio-emotional wealth. All right. So socio-emotional wealth is like I alluded to earlier, is a big theory in family business. So they wanted us to add all these things about socio-emotional wealth to the paper to integrate and enrich our arguments by more from a socio-emotional wealth perspective. And so to do that, of course, you have to totally revise the paper and the intro, and you go through all these things, and then you got to write this crazy response note back on it all. And then, we do our best, right? And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this one instance, it didn't work. And then we were a little frustrated, so we did some more stuff, and then we sent to another journal, and then that journal goes, take all the socio-emotional wealth out. And so, it's very sarcastic. It's very one point in time, very discreet in some regards. It's just the review process is amazing. So basically, in that sense, then what we did was we then took that back to an earlier version and then went forward. But yeah, and I'll say this: everybody who's been published well has been rejected a lot. And that's just the way it is. And you definitely want to follow the reviewers. I have worked with some people who are much better at it than I am in terms of pushing back against something they don't agree with. But they also have they also have several thousand more sites than I do. So they're better at it. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I wish more of us could be better at it. But Priscilla,
Yeah.
you had a question? Go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good.
Yes. My question pertains to what you spoke about with the first rejection. I actually have a paper right now, and I'm thinking your advice would help me in terms of more damage control. Now, I looked at a new variable in order to examine a popular theory. So I collected data, I did a pilot, and I ran an EFA first. I confirmed, and then I also used that scale as that new variable for the other data collection for the study itself. Do I now, can I just say that in the paper? Or is it that I have to publish the scale paper first, which I don't think that I would be able to, and then base the real study on that new scale?
Yeah, my initial take is, and Vishal, please jump in, obviously. My initial take is that what you would do is you would do all that in your response letter. So you would demonstrate to whoever the reviewer is asking, say, these are all the things that we did for scale development for this, the new variable that you alluded to. This is where we found it. Let's say you did something really cool and you found out that it's really correlated highly with something else, right? That you wanted it to be with. And that you have good scale development, that your betas and exploratory factor analysis, composite reliabilities, AVEs, all those things are great. And then you would, in the paper, you would literally just have like a sentence for that. So we did a pilot to test this and found, supportive results to allow us to move forward. But then definitely in the response letter, you would have everything in there to show them the level of rigor that you have done at that point. Vishal, what's your take on that?
I agree with that. I think the response letter has to be very detailed, show them the rigor. And perhaps these days, some of the trends are changing. So perhaps you can have an online appendix of some sort to describe that, but definitely document everything and put it in at least one document. And in the paper, and that's the funny part, I think, is the paper, it might be just one sentence or a footnote or two sentences. And you think, oh, I'm doing so much work for just one or two sentences, but that's the nature of it.
Right, and to that point, that could be literally what pushes you over the top too. So, because if your measures are not good, then you're in trouble.
Okay, thank you. I'm so happy to hear that. I don't have time to wait on publishing the first paper, then to do the next one. But this method is totally fine. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Tamara, you are next.
Okay, hi. Thank you for this conversation. I have a question I kind of left over from yesterday, actually, where I teach family business at Suffolk Business School in Boston, and I come from a family business. I'm an entrepreneur. We're practitioners. And when does a family business become a family business? My students ask me this all the time. I do project-based learning, so I have students whose parents have businesses, but is that a family business because it's their parents' company, or is it an enterprise? And then I'm also trying to get students more involved, get their businesses involved with our school, have them come do panel discussions, work with our law department, for succession plans. And students, I know who comes from family businesses, and I'll talk to them, and then they refuse to come to like our meetings that we have, like an open conversation with food to talk about your family business for a project. Like they say, well, we're not really kind of like a family business, or I don't know. It's just been really hard to kind of get students to engage in their role as a student and also a family business member, get their family business more engaged with, like, here's a whole business school. We could be helping out with all kinds of stuff. And even identifying, like, are you actually from a family business, or are you just thinking of starting something up and maybe in the future your kids will work there, but you don't even have kids yet? Does that make sense?
It does, Tamara.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and to your point real quickly, so I've been fortunate enough where I am in Mississippi to teach family business class. And so I totally relate with what you're talking about. And, I've even done a little bit of consulting, especially when I was back at Oregon State University a long time ago. And literally I was consulting a high-tech company that was really a family business. And all their problems were family business, but they didn't think they were a family business.
Mm-hmm.
They thought they were a tech company, but they had the father and the parents and the son was the CEO. And then there's all this tension between the son and the parents about how to manage the company. So literally it was just family business, but they didn't want to be called a family business.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of this is just real quickly, branding perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, you think about some places love to call themselves a family business, whereas you have like Chanel and Louis Vuitton, all these places that are family businesses, but don't want to be called family business at all.
Mm-hmm.
So good luck trying to diffuse that argument, because I've always discovered if they don't want to be called a family business, they're not going to be called a family business, but even though they are, right?
Do we
So
call it your parents' company? Like,
you can definitely do that. And by the way, I would, so from my perspective, definitionally speaking, if the parents are involved, or is anybody else in the company is involved, the family is involved with the company, they're a family business. They just are. They could be a first generation family business with the
Mhm.
founder, very entrepreneurial, but they are definitely a family business. And last but not least, there's some really cool exercises at familybusiness.org. I'm sure Kim talked about this because she runs that show over there, that has some really good stuff regarding family businesses. Like I did one with an exercise for the class where they actually go out and interview a family business, including could be the parents. And the whole point there is allows them to start thinking about things differently, right?
Mhm.
Plus, it build up Suffolk in terms of people saying, "Oh, Suffolk's doing cool stuff with family business." And you
Mhm.
can even want to bring them in to talk if you want to.
Good ideas.
Thank
Good
you.
luck, because yeah, man.
Thanks.
Sanjeev, you're next.
Yep. Thank you, Professor. Professor, the presentation was great and really enjoyed. I have a couple of questions with your permission. The first question is about the conjoint. In marketing, conjoint has been used a lot for pricing, packaging, etc. Studies. In entrepreneurship, is it more to do with what kind of research? Is it more to do with like investment decisions, strategies related to investments, etc.? What kind of studies actually one can use conjoint? Because otherwise, conjoint, I thought as a methodology, was a dying methodology and people scantily use it.
Well, Sanjeev, as you know, old wine, new bottle. That's the whole thing right there. So, as long as you can do that, you got something going on there. But the one from entrepreneurship, especially Dean Shepard, is your guy you'd want to look at. He used it all over the place in terms of strategies, but because it forces people to make, a decision, right? The whole point, it pairs it all the way down till you get to one decision point. And it's very rigorous because it keeps flashing, it keeps putting it back up, and you keep making the same decision over and over again. So that is where you would see that. So
Okay.
conjoint analysis, if you can do that in entrepreneurship, people will love it. And it is relatively still fresh for us, even though we know Dean Shepard has done it a lot.
And Clay, it's
Okay.
interesting. Earlier, you had mentioned how you've been wanting to do conjoint for a long time, but it hasn't worked. And I've been in the same position. It's amazing how few PhD students have taken the time to learn conjoint analysis. And so you're left with, well, I want to do it. I have an idea in mind, but there's no one really with who I think has the skills to do it.
Right. And I think there's another thing, and I will not speak for Sanjeev. So I know the basis of it, right? But I don't know if I know it well enough to write about it and to get it published and to do that. I don't.
And that's where good, training and taking classes that teach you these things is so, so important.
Right. And Sanjeev, you
Right.
got that from marketing. I would definitely apply it to entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Yeah. My
Perfect.
second question to you is quickly, I was very much quite interested in and sorry, entrepreneurship orientation as a construct. But with the development of the various theories, like for instance, you talked about the social identity theory, then we have the behavioral agency theory, etc. Do you think this is the right time now to completely relook at what EO was all about, or international entrepreneurship orientation is all about? Because the constructs were pretty old, and with the development of these kind of theories, is it a need now to revisit the entire construct of entrepreneurship orientation?
So, and I know Vishal has worked in this area, so I'm going to let Vishal have the final word on this. But from my perspective, when I have used entrepreneur orientation, A lot of people did not like it and thought it was too old, to your point. So what I have done though, and been fairly successful with, is look at things like innovativeness, which is one of the subdimensions of entrepreneur orientation. And it has done actually very well, especially because it's great rigor. I mean, the thing has been around forever. It's well established. Actually, to your point real quick, Sanjeev, right now, one of the papers I was bitching about earlier, complaining about strongly, about getting rejected one and come to another place, is literally what's happened is that I did a CFA and one of the items actually fell off because of CFA. The editor told me to put it back in there because the skill is so well established. So I'm gonna have to go back and put the thing back in there, which is fine, but that tells you how well established it is. Vishal, you get the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Clay. We just had an entrepreneurial orientation paper published in ISBJ, International Small Business Journal, and I am not hearing ideas from people that are new in terms of entrepreneurial orientation. I'm just hearing some version of old, I'm going to test this in whatever country or geography they are in. I'm like, that doesn't count at a top journal. You need to give me something more theoretically interesting than that. I don't hear that much anymore about EO.
Correct, yeah.
Perfect. So Ramjanul, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Thanks for the presentation, Professor Clay. You have properly outlined the contribution for the quantitative paper. So my question is how we should outline the contribution for the qualitative one. And the follow-up is, you mentioned about mixed method. So how is it going to be look like if we are using mixed method? Because I use both of them.
So I'll put it this way. Qualitative is another one of those beasts that's an art form. And it's Ramjanul, you obviously know how to do it better than I do. I'll stress that. Because it is a completely art form. I remember and Vishal get a giggle out of this. I had this really cool qualitative data thing. I went to Australia, I visited all these wineries, and it was family businesses and wineries, basically, is what it was. It was great. I had a good time. I was doing qualitative research. And then I get accepted at Babson. I go to Babson. Before I even go to Babson, Howard Aldridge writes to me and says, I'd love to talk to you more about your paper. Howard Aldridge, who you may or may not know, is a tremendous qualitative researcher. And anyway, I'm there, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, he's never talked to me before. And then I start to get worried now that maybe I don't know as much as I think I know. And this was me. I was an assistant professor at the time, and sure enough, I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. And he was very generous in his comments in the presentation, and I still like Howard a lot today. Oh boy, a lot, even more so now. But yeah, it's very difficult to do. And so if you do it well, like I have a colleague here by the name of Maria Gondo at Ole Miss. She does amazing qualitative research, but it takes her forever, as you know, because it's such an art form for that. And in terms of the mixed methods, by the way, that paper did get published. It just didn't get published where it should have been published, and that was a missed opportunity by me on that. But in terms of the mixed methods, what we're doing now is we're doing something regarding where we're going to go out and interview people to help guide us in terms of making sure that we're testing and measuring the right thing. And that's the predominant question, the research question for that. And Vishal, you just got one published. Kudos to you again. How would you answer that question in terms of what does that look like? You're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said it was published at Journal of Small Business Management, but we got rejected at ETNP, JBV, so we just kept sort of making our way down. The paper kept improving, and I feel like if I was more skilled at qualitative research, which is the mixed methods part of that paper, quant studies and qual studies, I could have published it. We could have published it better. So you start, you realize sort of the constraints of your own training as you go through the review process sometimes. And every time I've tried a qualitative paper, I have felt that constraint. So
it's hard. It's really hard. So good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Masa, you are next.
Hi, Dr. Dibrell. Thank you for your presentation. Actually, I am curious about the factors that most strongly influence the selection of exit strategies in a family business context, and how do these strategies differ when balancing family interest versus business continuity? Thank you.
So Masa, are you doing research in this area? The exits?
Actually, yes, I am working in social emotionally wealth in family business, but not in exit strategies, but I am interested in that too.
Yeah, so the exit strategies is one of my areas that I'm really focused on now, kind of going forward. That in like a family office, for example, especially when you think about from an entrepreneurship perspective. And I'll try to be quick here because I really am passionate about this topic. But from an entrepreneurship perspective, you know, you go through and it's exit, right? The whole point is you start, you launch, you exit. You come up with those strategies beforehand. And so if family businesses are entrepreneurial, shouldn't they not only have an exit strategy? And if they do exit from their primary business, are they no longer a family business? Kind of get back to what Tamara and I were talking about earlier in terms of what is and what is not a family business. And so if they have a family office and then they become like a venture capital group or they invest in real estate or whatever, isn't that still a family business? And so these are the type questions that I think are really interesting and we could focus upon for that. Exit strategies. I do something else where I have a very large group of family businesses in Mississippi that we do outreach with, and they do a lot with private equity. So they actually sell to private equity there. They also do some ESOPs, employee stock options, where they can leverage it out because the problem, and a major problem with family businesses is the fact that they're all illiquid. So almost all of them are illiquid, which means they have no liquidity. Everything's tied up in the business. Classic entrepreneurial problem, unless you're trying to exit it, right? Trying to focus on that exit strategy. So I think that is a really cool inflection point to see what that looks like, to see the dynamics within the family. For instance, how do you pay for mom and dad's retirement if they're, you know, if you've been working in the company the whole time, reinvesting everything into it? How do the children pay for that without hurting the company? So that's one way, the private equity, or do you sell out and then, so for instance, one of the groups I talk about, a company called, I won't tell you the company, but anyway, they literally sold out a bunch of nursing homes or homes for the elderly. And then they took that money and now they're throughout reinvesting it throughout their area, the world. And so the big focus there is, you know, they're not done. They're still doing business. They're still a company. There's still going to be this transgenerational wealth passing, but what's changed? So, no, I think it's a really cool area.
Thank you, Clay. Shikha, you're next.
Hi, Professor. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I was just wondering, in this paper also that we had to read today, 5% is considered usually as a percentage for family ownership. And that is a normal stand. And because I come from India, and when I look towards Asia in general, I think the number or the percentage starts increasing. Maybe it's more beyond 20, 50, and it could go even to 80% or 90%. Do you think it creates any difference in our understanding of family forms or the research output or the dynamics?
Without a doubt, it does. Chicago, because I was going to say, literally, to your point, and what we're really talking about, both of us, is ownership concentration versus ownership dispersion. And so the ownership concentration, and you're completely right. So the U.S., especially publicly traded, 5%. But then we could also throw in voting rights. So if they have voting rights that controls the company, then that would be interesting. Whereas to your point, I know, and specifically in India, for example, many of these large companies are 80% or greater owned by the family. or different holding companies of the family. And so, I think that is, I agree completely with you about that. Now, I would say it does influence. I mean, I look at, I had a student from Korea, and we look at the Kaibols there, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. But, Samsung, for instance, they got them all over the place. They're all holding companies, and they're all get back there, and that definitely influences their control as well as the type of decisions they make. But, one could argue Samsung is, for the most part, a pretty innovative company. So they're more risk forward than you would think, than most people would think for a family business to be. So yes, I do agree with you. Yes. And I think that'd be a really cool, once again, international context study. For better or for worse, North America, we dominate a lot of these areas, but you'll see a lot more in Europe, especially when you look at things done by Matthias Nordqvist, who's at Stockholm. He does a lot of the Swedish firms, and because they've got that great survey group there. Anyway, those are much more dominant in terms of ownership. But you can see, I think that would be really cool to focus, especially larger companies. And, we talk about qualitative research. Can you imagine being inside like Tata or something like that at their board meetings, and just hearing them talk about how they make decisions and how interesting that would be? So.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Tata because Shikha and I, when I visited her institution, we went to the Tata Museum, and they have a lot of data available if only some creative researcher uses that data to do some good quality research. That would be interesting.
Excellent, excellent.
So Hira, now Clay, I think I told you 60 minutes and we are already at 75. Do you have time to take one more question?
Yes, one more, please. That'd be
Okay,
great.
so
And I'll try
Hira,
to
do
be
you
quick
want
for
to ask
everybody.
your question?
Hi there. Actually, I have a bad throat, so I just put my question in chat box. Can you read?
I'm sorry. What did you say? Apologize. I misunderstood you.
Yeah, she said she has a bad throat, so I'll read her question to you. She put it in
Oh,
the chat.
gotcha. Hope you
Her
feel better.
question,
Sarah.
her question is, we see the trend of succession and nepotism in certain professions, and the organization structures are molded by the trend of that specific family succession into that profession, military or maybe showbiz. So does the organizational structures in that case play similar to what organizational structures are in family business? So I guess the first part of the question is, or I guess that's my interpretation, is do you share about this concern? Do you share the concern about nepotism in family businesses? And is it similar to nepotism in showbiz or any other profession? And how do you think about succession planning in family business and in these other industries where there's nepotism?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So there's a great paper by Howard Schultz and Mike Lubakin back in 2003, and it talks about altruism. And so altruism is literally the family's perspective, and that the company is created to benefit the family. So I cannot speak to the military side, for example, but I can make a conjecture that similarly, if we know how someone has been trained and raised, we could argue that they're the best person for the family to maintain control for these things. So control is always a big one right there. But he calls it altruism. And if you look at a definition of altruism, altruism means doing something that's beneficial, right? Doing something positive. Whereas nepotism is negative and it's outside of the family's perspective. And so if I'm an employee or if I am a customer, I could potentially argue this is nepotism, right? And so that is a negative because therefore you're not allowing market or meritocracy for the best individuals to rise. That is what we would argue. And that is where we see a lot with professionalism come in. And so one of the reasons why family businesses, publicly traded family firms, are not, quote, family businesses in some people's eyes, is because literally, there's a non-family CEO, There's all these non-family top management teams. There may be just one or two members of all the family involved. All right. And so that's where that pressure comes into play about what is and what's not. From succession though, and I remember, I will name drop here, Jim Chrisman and I were talking something, had a similar question. And he basically said, always remember that the family business exists for the family. Always remember that. Good or bad, it always exists for the family. And so, if you could think of it that way in terms of succession, why would they not choose their son or daughter to be the next whatever, right? To succeed them? Why would they not do that if it's all about control? And so that's in the resources and benefit the family.
Perfect. Thank you, Clay. And I know we are gonna continue to have more questions, but we also need to bring this to an end. So if I may ask you, what would your advice be to aspiring entrepreneurship scholars? What would you suggest that they do if they want to have a good research career?
Well, first of all, the hard work, always hard work. But I'll say this, so you're in the right area, in the right field, and there has been such, I'll put it, resilience and growth in entrepreneurship research, and the importance of entrepreneurial in general have increased dramatically, or seemingly. I think it's a great field to be in. A lot of other fields potentially are saturating or peaking, or there's a ceiling. I think entrepreneurship is wide open, and there's so many other topics that you can pull. We were talking about like earlier, the old wine, new bottle, conjoint analysis. If you can come at it with something like that, my gosh, you can do great here. And I think I'll put it this way, one of the reasons Vishal and I are in entrepreneurship is because the market and the market being entrepreneurship research journals, liked what we were doing, allowed us to publish in them. That's the same thing with what you're trying to do. So look at the market, see what the market likes. Inevitably, and Vishal, I don't know how many topics you moved from, but I have definitely moved topics from like business level, RBV stuff, to now corporate governance, even to micro behaviors. Stuff I would never have done earlier in family business research or career hybrid entrepreneurship. I'm doing a lot in that area too. So things that I never would have done. So, but that's my only advice is you're in a great area, work hard, try, intellectual curiosity, work with good people, follow through, do what you say you're going to do, and you should be in great shape. Don't lie. But anyway, do what you say you can do, and you're going to be in great shape. Vishal, is there anything you want to add to that? Because I know you've got so many wonderful thoughts, and you've done a great job organizing this, for example.
Thank you, Clay. But I think you hit the nail on the head. So I fully agree with you on this. We are in a wonderful field of entrepreneurship research. There's a lot to do. And I hope people just go ahead and do.
Exactly. Just do it. We'll borrow from Nike on that one.
Thank you, Clay, for your time.
And thank you very much for letting me come and enjoy being with you. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful, guys. That was Dr. Clay Dibrell, very good person, very good scholar. I hope you got something.